When you get into reading up on the history of D&D and the many monsters that populate its past, there are always a few standouts. Creatures that rise head and shoulders above the others as iconic in some way. When I talk about monsters like this, I mean creatures like beholders, mind flayers, or mimics. Though among the most iconic monstrosities that infest the pages of ancient D&D books, there are some among them that might not be as well known to modern D&D enthusiasts. But to those who are familiar with their lore, merely mentioning a creature like the Phaerimm triggers an anxiety response no mind flayer or beholder could ever hope to match. And today we're going to dive into the history and lore of these creatures, convert them to 5th edition, and talk about just what exactly makes them so cosmically terrifying. Phaerimm, despite not being a major part of 5th edition D&D, have some of the most extensive lore and backstory of any creature in the game's history that isn't one of the usual suspects. They first appeared in 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons as part of the Anarok supplement, which, believe it or not, is all about the Anarok Desert in the Forgotten Realms. Their story is extremely important to the grander tale of Realms lore, but it essentially boils down to this. The Phaerimm lived in the Underdark, occupying a large cavernous realm that was underneath the lush and verdant land which would eventually become the infamous Desert of Anarok. This is foreshadowing. They were vibing and just kind of doing their own worm wizard thing when eventually they noticed that something from the surface was starting to extract their arcane power, thus making them slightly weaker. Upon investigation, they found the Netherese Empire with their massive flying cities, and as it turns out, a bunch of the magic they were drawing on to fuel those cities was coming at the detriment of the Phaerimm. So the Worm Boys here, of course, saw the only rational course of action was to approach the humans, explain the predicament, and negotiate some kind of treaty. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. They orchestrated a genocide. What they actually did was cast a bunch of slow-acting spells which would deprive the land above of all life and magical energy, effectively creating a dead zone where nothing could thrive beneath the cities of the Netherese. So naturally, the Netherese moved their flying cities to more fertile land, but for some reason, the weird desert that was forming beneath them just followed them wherever they went. The places they initially moved their cities would ultimately become the borders for what would soon be Anarok, the lifeless desert. By the time the people of Netheril realized what was happening, it was like way too late. The Phaerimm had already started to enact the second phase of their plan, which was an all-out war against the Netherese Empire, where they were specifically targeting seats of power and places of arcane knowledge. They were trying their best to undercut the Netherese ability to progress in learning magic, lest they rival the power of the Phaerimm. And they were super successful, eventually leading to a series of events that would cause the downfall of the Netherese Empire, literally, as their cities plummeted from the sky one after another. And at this point, it seemed like all hope was truly lost. That was at least until another race of weird magical creatures called the Sharn, not to be confused with the city in Eberron, decided to intervene and mix things up. And by intervene, I mean they basically rolled in and spanked the Phaerimm into submission. Sharn are really weird creatures. They live in an alternate plane of reality, and they're super smart, and they view themselves as sort of protectors of magic, and basically will take out anyone they feel is abusing it to the extent it threatens the balance of the cosmos itself. It is highly implied that if they wanted to, they could probably just rule the material plane. They simply have no interest in doing so. So that's cool. Definitely don't see that coming back to bite the material plane in any meaningful way in the future. But what they did have an interest in was casting a spell so powerful it imprisoned every living thing within the Underdark as it existed beneath the Anarok Desert. And this literally trapped 99% of the Phaerimm race in a magic prison. Despite their intervention though, the area of the surface where the Phaerimm had used their anti-life magic would never truly recover back to what it once was, and neither would the Netherese Empire. But at least the world at large was saved from Phaerimm tyranny. For the most part. Because while the Phaerimm were largely placed in captivity, those who had managed to avoid the spell because they were not at home when it happened devoted themselves to freeing their brethren, no matter how long it took. This has really only served to make them entirely more dangerous as individuals, since they now have this added pressure of saving their species, and each and every Phaerimm is wholly devoted to the study of magic, with the hopes that they might one day find a way to unlock the prison that holds their kin. And those on the inside, while trapped, are also free to just kind of live their lives and study the ways of magic as well. Nobody really knows what life inside the imprisoned area is truly like, but it stands to reason that the Phaerimm stuck in there are pissed, and they have nothing but time on their hands. And even barring this whole crazy situation, when it comes to magic, there truly is nothing more important to the Phaerimm individually or societally. They use it for every task, ranging from the mundane to the absolute most important. They view magic ability as a mark of one's worthiness, meaning that being practiced in the arcane is not only important to them as a means of fighting and living, but also as a way to assert social dominance. Their leaders are always the most accomplished practitioner of the arcane arts, and in combat, while they may be perfectly able to use weapons and fight physically, they will never stoop to doing anything other than casting spells unless they're backed into a corner so aggressively they fear for their lives. But even then, engaging in physical combat for any reason is seen as a sign of weakness and therefore a point of great shame. After all, if you had to bite someone's head off with your horrible worm mouth, that just means your spells were too bitch-made to get the job done. The one allowance for physical violence often given is that it can be acceptable for young Phaerimm who are still learning powerful combat spells to use magically enchanted weapons if they must. But growing out of this phase is something akin to taking the training wheels off when learning how to ride a bike. And speaking of riding bikes, this week's video is sponsored by a truly amazing company with some hot wares to peddle. Is that anything? It's Dice Time, baby. Everything Dice is a company that makes beautiful handcrafted dice. Go figure. These dice are lightweight and truly beautiful to look at. I mean, just check out all these amazing options on their website. Each set is balanced for casual play and designed to be super eye-catching at the table. But as we all know, of course the pictures on their website are going to be perfectly lit in order to make the dice look as best as possible. So of course I needed to know, does the real deal hold up? Spoilers for the second half of this ad, but it does. Everything Dice sent me 2 sets of dice so I could check them out for myself, making this not just an ad, but also kind of a review. Each set comes in a sturdy little storage box with some really cool art on it that just feels high quality to touch. And when you slide the tray out, you are of course greeted by some sparkly little math rocks embedded in foam to keep them from rolling around. And upon closer inspection, these dice are awesome. They roll really nicely, they feel good, they're readable, and they look sick. Unironically, I'm probably gonna pick up a couple more sets of these just because I like them, and I mean, it is almost the holiday season. What a great little gift for the nerd in your life. It even comes with its own box. And if you're hoping to, I don't know, receive a set of these as a gift, maybe just leave the Everything Dice page open on your family computer. But in either case, whether you're buying them for someone else or convincing someone else to buy them for you, you can save 15% on your first order by using the link in the description down below or simply just putting in my code DungeonDad at checkout. Now that's a squeal of a deal. Thank you so much to Everything Dice for bringing us here to talk about this giant tube sock that casts spells. And with all that said, let's jump back and get into some more tube sockery. So as both sentient and highly intelligent creatures, Phaerimm can of course appear in a wide variety of settings and fulfill lots of different NPC type roles. They may simply be starting out on their journey of arcane discovery, or you could be dealing with an elder who has had a lifetime to master magic, which given their lifespan of about 400 years, is a lot of spellcasting knowledge. But we of course need to give them stats, so we can use them in the game, and the stat block I'm going to present to you today is a CR10 version of this monster that is essentially the default most common type of this creature you're gonna encounter. Think of it as the average member of the Phaerimm species. They all have a fly speed of 30 feet and some pretty great stats with a nice juicy 20 in intelligence, of course, for learning magic. They've also got true sight out to 90 feet, which is insane, and resistance to non-magical damage from weapons. They've also got immutable form and magic resistance, thus furthering their defenses, and when it comes to offense, they do of course have a claw, bite, and tail attack, none of which are ever used unless they find themselves in real trouble. But they do all hit for a pretty good amount of damage, and the tail attack is coated in a toxin that paralyzes its victims and causes the target to levitate off the ground for some reason. That's an extremely random detail, but it's my stat block. I get to decide what we keep and what we don't from the older ones, so it stays. I guess it makes it easier to like push them around, but there's other way easier ways to do that. Now, of course, the most important thing about the Phaerimm stat block is the spells it has access to. And while intelligence is important for the arcane studies a Phaerimm undergoes, they actually use charisma to cast their spells, making them more akin to warlocks and paladins. The way they understand the concepts behind casting magic is just so different and alien to most wizards and learned scholars, it makes them kind of fascinating and also gives them a different approach. to using magic. By default, they can of course cast a bunch of damage dealing spells like Cone of Cold, Disintegrate, and Fireball, though their other specialty seems to be in domination magic with things like Mass Suggestion, Crown of Madness, and Detect Thoughts. Though again, as sentient beings who are part of a much larger species, the specific spell list from Phaerimm to Phaerimm might vary a lot, actually. However, their penchant for mind control is entirely baked into the species' biology because they have an innate ability that isn't technically even a spell called Phaerimm Domination. This ability is on a recharge of 5 to 6 and essentially allows them to cast Dominate Monster. The target has to make a DC 19 Wisdom saving throw or be charmed and dominated for 24 hours. And this ability essentially functions exactly like the two primary domination spells we have in the game, except for the fact that it overrides people who are immune to the charmed condition. If you're a creature who is normally immune to being charmed, you still get advantage on your save at least, but this ability will function as normal if you fail your saving throw. And that ability specifically is what has made Phaerimm so feared across the multiverse. Their ability to mind control and subjugate other creatures is legendary. So even the most powerful beings who normally don't even give a second thought to that sort of thing are at risk. And if those powerful beings are ever dominated by a creature with ill intent, that's really bad for everyone. In fact, dominating the mind of another being is generally considered pretty not cool. So I mean, their bad rap is somewhat earned. They also have one of the wildest counterspell options I've ever seen on a stat block in the form of a reaction called Arcane Malformation. This reaction triggers anytime a creature it can see within 60 feet casts a spell. The creature then has to make an intelligence saving throw. However, instead of losing the spell if they fail, they simply take 1d8 damage for each level of the spell they're casting. So while they still get to do the thing, they may also blow themselves up in the process. But what really makes Phaerimm so special is not their mastery over magic, or the fact they have some powerful melee options they refuse to use, but how they can actually fit into a D&D campaign. So let's talk about that, and move on to a few plot hooks. Something extremely important to the Phaerimm identity is the fact that they have a unified goal, for the most part, as a species. Even if you're not playing D&D in the Forgotten Realms, the idea that the majority of their kind is imprisoned somewhere is a really interesting quirk. The inside of that prison is, of course, their ancestral homeland, so there are entire cities in there, and presumably the Phaerimm inside are all just kind of living life as best they can. Something really fascinating about this prison, though, is that there is a gateway that you can go to. It's only one way. It will only allow you to pass into the prison. You cannot get back out once you go through, but it exists. So the Phaerimm on the outside are constantly sending messages through the gate to keep their brethren informed of any major magical discoveries they might make, but they will also send through a portion of their captured and dominated creatures to serve the other Phaerimm within the prison, since they can't exactly dominate any creatures themselves. And I mean, that could present a really interesting plot point to start off a campaign or small adventure. Perhaps the players are all being dominated by the Phaerimm, and they find themselves mysteriously free of the creature's domination. But now they're in the ancestral home of the Phaerimm. How do they get out? Can they get out? And why is the domination magic not working on them? Perhaps there's simply a member of the Phaerimm species with better moral judgment than the others who is trying to help them out. Or maybe there's an underground network of formerly dominated creatures which is formed within the prison, and they're working to break the bonds of as many people as possible in order to form an uprising. I also think it's really interesting to examine how Phaerimm culture may have changed inside of this prison. The Phaerimm in the trap have been stuck there for thousands of years. There are likely none of them alive who were present during the initial imprisonment, making this place all they've ever known. Have they remained the same? Become more cruel? Perhaps devised a different style of government? I mean, it's possible they've changed so much that they no longer align with the philosophies of their kin on the outside. Because while they can receive messages, they have no way of contacting their brethren going the other way. What assumptions might they have about the outside world based on what limited knowledge they've received? Who can say? It's a real allegory of the cave-ass situation. Another thing we haven't talked about yet is how these little fellas reproduce. Because you just know something that looks like this isn't gonna be normal about it. Phaerimm are born from eggs. Like many creatures, however, these eggs are stored within the stinging tail of the Phaerimm and implanted into creatures when they sting them. Then after 5d6 days, the egg hatches and a little tube sock monster explodes from the creature's body, a la Alien. Now, not every Phaerimm is just out here packing a tail full of eggs, but if they are ready to reproduce, as per the sidebar in my stat block, when they hit a creature and they fail their save by 5 or more, they've been egged. And if they don't get rid of that parasitic egg with magic like Restoration, they are decidedly cooked. There are so many awful ways to die in Dungeons & Dragons, and Phaerimm egg explosion is one of them. So on that note, maybe you start off the adventure with all of the players being implanted with a parasite. Except instead of a cool mind flayer tadpole like in that one game, it's a chest-bursting aberration like in that one movie. A totally different thing. But whether you're doing that or something entirely different, when you include a monster of this caliber into your game world, you really need to ask yourself what it even is. Because to me, Phaerimm are in every way sort of representative of an endemic threat to the local ecosystem and environment. Their magic literally strips life away from the places on the surface they assault. Everywhere they crop up, the natural world starts to die off as a result of their magic. And if they were truly victorious, the entire surface of the world would likely be a lifeless desert, devoid of anything even resembling a thinking creature. I mean, they've done it once before to a relatively small part of the world, and they were only stopped because the goopy boys from an outer plane intervened. But next time, we might not be so lucky. Though however you choose to use this monster, as always, linked in the description down below is a 5th edition stat block in the form of a Google document. And of course, if you're one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, you can find that same stat block information. However, it is presented in a high-res PDF with the new beautiful artwork, which by the way was done this week by Dakota Curry, a fantastic artist who really captured the horrific tube sock teeth-filled void-like nature of this monster. I hate it. And that's a good thing in this instance. And speaking of patrons, it's time for Patron of the Week. This week's randomly selected patron is Sir Kays. Thank you so much for the extra support, my friend. It means the most. A finer night I could not ask for. And thank you so much for watching. As always, if there's a monster from an older edition of 5th edition or Pathfinder or some other tabletop role-playing game that you would like to see me talk about, dive into the history of, and convert into 5th edition, please let me know in the comments down below or in the Dungeon Dad Discord, which is linked in the description down below. And who knows? You might just see it show up on an episode of Monster of the Week. I also want to take a second to give a massive shout out to myself and Wally DM and Mr. Tarask and JVC Perry, because we are getting back together again to work on a brand new monster book. We did the Quintessential Guide to Monsters a couple years ago, and that was super fun. And we're doing another one. It's going to be called The Quintessential Guide to Urban Encounters, which is all about encounters that might happen to you and your adventuring party while you're in a city. The whole idea is we're basically going to make a bunch of encounters that are like tailor-made, ready to go, drag and drop into your game that contain all kinds of fun encountery city stuff, and a lot of them are going to have entirely brand new monsters that are attached to said encounters, which is really fun. And that's essentially what we did with the first book, but in this one we're also creating a unique city, and the whole thing is kind of like a grander location, almost like a mini setting with all these different encounters and locations and NPCs that are all interconnected. So if you want to just kind of put this entire city in your game with like all these encounters and things that can happen, you can do that. Or if you're running Dragon Heist or some other campaign in a city of your own creation, and you just like one of the encounters, you can just take that, leave the rest of it, and come back to it when you have another need for a city encounter. But yeah, we're getting this made. It's going live on BackerKit on Tuesday, November 19th, which may be after this video comes out, if everything goes as planned. I don't know what's gonna happen there. There's a chance it's already live, but in either case, that will also be linked down below in the description. So please go check it out, follow us for updates over there. And if it's live by the time this comes out, consider backing it. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think the book's going to be awesome, and we have some massive ideas. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then.